Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable number 29. So glad that you can join us. I'm joined by Russians with Attitude. It's Nikolai and Kirill. Guys, how's it going?
Yes, hello, Gonzalo. You just showed me this little lovely
Hello.
photo wallpaper of Kharkiv, claiming that you're still there. That's interesting. So, how can you? Well, it's pre-industrial, right?
It's
How
it's
are you
it's the
connected to internet?
holographic technology that President Zelensky has been using and demonstrating. That's how I do it. Yes. Oh, by the way, before we get started, I just want to say a couple of things to the chat. Chat, how's it going? I hope you're doing well. And I just want to mention that I started a new channel for my solo videos. The link is in the description below. And I've also posted in the description links to Russians with Attitude Twitter account where you can find their podcast, which is really, really good. They have really interesting guests, and I hope you check them out and subscribe to them. And yeah. So anyway, guys, how's it going in Russia?
Same as usual, I think. Right
Same as
now,
usual.
after a bleak, dark month of September, in all ways, really. Right now, well, mobilization, the first wave of mobilization seems to be over, or their pretend it is. So they apparently got their share of soldiers. And
Mm-hmm.
now the armies might be close to the Ukrainian number. So,
Nah, it's still very far off from Ukrainian numbers.
what are your ideas about it?
Well, the Russian group in Ukraine was around 200,000 or 150,000, and now there's gonna be up to 300,000 more, so it's something like 450,000, and the Ukraine, it's hard to estimate numbers for the Ukrainian army. Officially, they claim to have over 700,000 people under arms.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just go by these numbers, then it's like 700 against 45,000, which is much closer to parity than it was, of course.
Yeah,
But
it's no
still,
longer three soldiers to one. And there is also a rumor that Belarus can join the war. Of course, it's total speculation, but what do you guys think?
I don't think that Belarus is going to join in the actual fighting because I don't think that they have the army large enough to do that, to add really anything measurable. Certainly in support, but in so far as combat troops, I would doubt it. I think that it's going to be an all Russian combat operation, but that's my speculation. But after all, Belarus has a very small population. I do believe it's below 10 million,
Yeah,
if memory serves me right.
I think
yes,
they have 50,000 professional soldiers, right? And about 300,000 in reserves. But
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like,
yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
actually, I'm not sure they do have contract soldiers. As far as I remember, the Belarusian army is completely on the conscript model. Um, of course, there is, in my opinion, there is too much of an emphasis in military analysis on the difference between contract troops and mobilized troops. Since if they get proper training, the conscripts, there is really not that much of a difference in combat efficiency because like in practical terms, sitting around at an army base in Latakia for 2 years doesn't really add to your combat efficiency compared to a conscript who just finished his training. Of course, it's experience, the experience of being like under artillery fire. It's just not something you would get in even if you're a Russian contract soldier. So they all have to learn how to survive because there simply hasn't been such a war in decades anywhere in the world.
No, no. This is the first, like war, if you will, since Korea, or before that, the Second World War.
I mean, maybe Iran, Iraq, was
Yeah,
comparable in
yeah,
scope.
yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. Iran, Iraq, and offhand, I can't think of anything. Well, the first Gulf War, but it was a lopsided match, so I don't think that you can really compare.
Yeah.
And certainly, you cannot compare Iraq or Afghanistan over the last 20 years. I mean, that was just it was insurgency. And what's interesting is that NATO has geared himself up for an American type war of insurgency, and they are unprepared for this. And what's interesting, I'm hearing, is that they're running out of weapons. Have you guys heard that?
Yes, I did hear that. I mean, of course, I don't know any hard numbers or anything. It's mostly rumors. But I heard that on the recent, I think like a week ago, there was a joint American-Japanese exercise, and they were supposed to do large-scale exercises with the HIMARS, MLRS
Mm-hmm.
system,
Yep.
and supposedly they didn't have enough missiles for those systems to properly train with them because all the missiles have been sent to Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm just showing my cigarettes because somebody in chat was asking what I smoke. And yeah.
General Kurinia. Yeah.
What's General Kurinia?
There's it says Kurinia вбивая.
Oh,
Smoking kills, right? And I
smoking
wonder,
kills.
yeah,
Yeah,
what
but it'll
kind
take a
of
long goddamn
General
time.
Kurinia of Russian army
What does
there
it say in
is?
the back?
Курцы помирают рано. Well,
Smokers die early.
Yeah.
Well, I've got bigger fish to fry. I've got more contingent worries at this time. And the thing is, I'm really surprised here in Kharkov that in my sector of the city, there is electricity. Apparently in the suburbs, there's not. There's no electricity for the subway. And at night, everything is turned off. No street lights. So it's a little unnerving to be walking down the sidewalk in the dark because you really don't see anything.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and what's funny is that a lot of people have broken out the flashlights, and the flashlights are actually gone from the home repair stores, and it's very interesting because it's sort of like a twilight city. There are restaurants that are open, there are supermarkets that are open, banks that are open even, but a lot of other stores are closed. But like the sporting goods store is open, so it's all a mix and match kind of thing. Like people are trying to live a normal life, and everybody's agreed here that the air raid sirens are incredibly annoying at this point because there's nothing you can do. Either you've put yourself in a place that's safe from any kind of explosion, or you haven't. So why bother? If it happens, it happens. And so that's the attitude of a lot of people here. Very Russian attitude, I might add.
Yeah. Do you have a power generator of your own?
No, I don't. No.
Uh-huh.
And even if I did, the internet wouldn't be working. And so, it's if I'm assuming that if my lights go out, then my internet service provider will be out as well. And so it's very exciting. I have to admit. I think I mentioned this on the podcast I did on your channel, on your show, that I was in the 2010 Chilean earthquake, which was really spectacular. It was an 8.8 earthquake, and I felt it in Santiago. We were away from the epicenter, of course, but we felt it like as an equivalent of an 8.6, and I was on the 15th floor of my building. It only had 15 floors. I was on the top floor. And the building just whipped around. It was like a circular motion, right? And being here in Kharkov is sort of like that, but prolonged, endlessly prolonged. To tell you the truth, by this time I thought that the war would have been over by now. And what do you guys think of this turn of events with General Armageddon Surovikin now in overall charge of the situation?
Well, yeah, infrastructure strikes seems to be the most important subject of right now. But I just thought that, if we were to compare modern modern calamities with Leningrad's blockade of Second World War, now it's worse in some ways because modern people without all those utilities, their city becomes an icy, frozen hellhole, basically.
Yes.
And they don't have any in-home stoves because in Leningrad they had stoves, so-called burzhuika, and were much more adaptive in general.
Yes.
And they didn't live in 30 floors buildings either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. My thinking is that when the electricity goes out for definite, for sure, forever, I'm gonna just start burning furniture in the living room. Fuck it, I'm renting this place, so it doesn't matter. If I lose my security deposit, fine. I wasn't gonna be using that money anyway. So yeah. But no, the electricity, the electrical grid, the way they're hitting it all across the country is completely flatlining the west of Ukraine. And my thinking at this time, I thought so at the beginning of this conflict that Russia was eventually going to wind up having to take over the whole thing. And from the recent translations of Putin's latest press conference, which the Duran made a podcast about this, a post about this just today, as a matter of fact, just about half an hour ago. On more careful analysis of what Putin is saying, he seems to leave open the door for the fact that the Russian army their intent is to take over the whole country. Do you think that that's in the cards?
Well, it depends on what we mean by takeover. I don't think that anyone in the Kremlin or even in Russia really wants to annex all of Ukraine, but I do think that it's likely that at least a temporary military occupation would be needed, like up to the Polish border. It depends on a lot of factors, but I do think it's in the cards eventually.
Nikolai?
yeah, what seems to be happening right now is артподготовка, right? Is a preliminary artillery bombardment, which destroys Ukrainian infrastructure before an offensive. Basically, what we should have seen in February, the way Americans destroy power grid before the attack, right? But in February, Russian army decided against it, possibly because of unwillingness to repair the damages later on after a successful regime change or something like that. Now it's clear that it was not possible at all, and now, well, yeah, because Kiev being having internet, electricity, heating, all that would not succumb and not rebel against their leads or whatever. They would unite and they would die to defend it. So Russians are now trying to emulate the American model, and we'll see how well it goes.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is that because of these recent strikes and the loss of electricity and other utilities, a lot of people in Kiev, and this is rumor, and I ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that a lot of Ukrainians are becoming dissatisfied with the way that the Zelensky regime is carrying out this conflict, and wishing that they had signed the Minsk II agreement, or they signed it, but rather carry it out and fulfill it. Have you been hearing something similar?
I must say I have not. I do imagine that a lot of people are unhappy with the situation they found themselves in, but I personally can't really imagine like a large percentage of people blaming this on their government. I mean, it depends on region, of course. Like if it's closer to the east, then of course more people are anti-Kiev, but in Kiev itself, I don't know, I really can't imagine people turning on Zelensky right now.
Well, especially considering the fact that so many families here in Ukraine have no idea what has happened to their sons and husbands and fathers. And there seems, I personally am not seeing this in Kharkov, but I am hearing from different sources that there seems to be quite a bit of discontent about that particular fact. Have you been hearing anything along those lines?
I mean, yes, that is definitely a thing that happens. There have been videos of protests. It's because the Ukrainian military very often doesn't recognize soldiers as killed in action and keeps them in the missing in action status, basically. Both this can have a ton of reasons, both nefarious and just incompetence. I'm not sure, but it prevents families from finding closure regarding their relatives, and it also prevents payouts, which the government must make to the families of fallen soldiers. And thus having thousands of people stuck in this limbo of being missing in action. It is just neither here nor there. No one knows where they are. There is no contact with them. A lot of Ukrainian families are finding their relatives through the Russian Telegram channel that posts prisoners of war. And some Ukrainian families simply who are not being told by the government where their relatives are, they just find them in these lists and photos of prisoners, and that's how they find out that their relatives have been POWs.
Nikolai?
Well, can't really add anything to that. I'm not an expert on Kiev or the inhabitants.
Well, then tell us about Russia. I mean, how are people in Russia responding to this mobilization and this stepping up of the whole conflict effort?
Well, in the first 2 weeks, there was some slight panic. Some people left to Kazakhstan, to Turkey, to wherever, right? To Georgia. Yeah, the go-to place. I can't imagine why Georgia of all places, right? It's not, well, it's quite small. It's overrun with Russian expats. It has now a very, Muscovite culture in Tbilisi. It's really awful. The worst people of Russia came to Georgia.
Oh, really? Like, worse in what way?
Well, worse in that they're insufferable Twitter addicts, that are addicted to soy lattes. And they are mad that Tbilisi does not have enough soy lattes. And that's the point of, well, the locals are not happy, I imagine. And not just because they're Russophobic, but, well, if I was a Georgian, I would beat them probably, right? If I saw.
Okay.
So, yeah. But now there is not such a, well, I haven't heard of anyone leaving from my relatives or friends in real life, but it did happen in the first 2 weeks. Right now, after General Surovikin, the general atmosphere is better. People are not panicking as much.
Okay.
Well, yeah, people might who follow this war are stuck from both sides, are stuck in this sadistic cycle of cheering for destruction of an enemy and then weeping when enemy hits back, right?
Yeah, that's natural.
It's like, yeah, sure, but it's really weird because, well, I did not live under such conditions before. Like when Kievans on Sunday, whatever, on 9th of October, right? They were cheering for destruction of Kievan Bridge, well, of Kerch Bridge over to Crimea, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was not destruction of a bridge, of course, but it was a terrorist attack that was swiftly fixed, but they were ecstatic. And the following day, General Surovikin comes and airstrikes begin. And they are surprised. Why? Why did they hit us? We didn't do nothing. And this is, well, yeah, it's not good for the national psyche. These cycles of Zrada and Перемога. Do you know, Gonzalo, Zrada and Перемога?
You are muted, Gonzalo.
Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah, I figured that my audience didn't want to hear me blow my nose. And no, it's not that I'm emulating the cokehead of Kiev, okay? I've looked around, there's no goddamn coke in this whole fucking city, so no coke for me. But I've been going here, going there, nothing. But anyway.
This is Zrada.
No, you were asking me about a Russian term. Is it
No,
food?
no Russian. It's Ukrainian terms actually.
What are they?
Zrada means what does
It
it
means
mean?
treason. It means treason. It's
Oh yeah.
basically it's kind of a meme. It's two terms that are often used in Ukraine to describe political events. It's zrada, which means treason, and перемога, which means victory. And it's basically the whole "it's over, we're back" cycle. It's like whenever something good happens, it's перемога, it's victory, and whenever something bad happens, it's zrada, it's treason. Someone fucked up, someone betrayed us, and it's basically this probably natural, as you said, but still very unhealthy conception of conceptualizing things either as total victory or total defeat with no in between.
It's an infantile. Unfortunately, by the way, I didn't know the term, and it's because, well, you guys know me. I'm an idiot. I can't learn a goddamn language to save my life. And to go to the serious point of treason or victory, I think it is a hysterical attitude, probably brought about by the excess propaganda, which is absolutely saturated all of the airwaves here. I turn on the television and I don't understand what they're saying, but I don't need to understand the words that they're saying. I understand the sentiment, and it's, you know, cheerleading and rah rah rahism. And of course, it sends your emotions back and forth until you get to a point of emotional exhaustion. I mean, just watching the Ukrainian television for 5 minutes without understanding it, you get exhausted because there's this, it's this constant PR adrenaline, or not adrenaline, it's triggering your adrenaline and making you, you know, get like hysterical. Okay, so I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all by that.
Yeah, and I think an important aspect of this is that propaganda in any form,
by the way, I'm still here. Yeah, go ahead.
It works a lot better on people who are stressed.
Yeah.
Like in the literal sense, like having elevated stress hormones.
Yeah, exactly
and
right.
it's this process is very fast actually and very restless. It's basically like learned helplessness shock therapy.
Yeah, exactly
And
right.
it's people who are in a constant state of stress and anxiety. They tend to cling to literally anything that is presented to them, and thus are much more susceptible to propaganda.
Yeah, and my concern is that that kind of hysteria is contagious, not just with the common people who are the victims of it, but also with the leadership classes. Because what I'm seeing in the United States and Western Europe is more and more hysteria, that because they recognize what's about to come, and they're just having a complete hissy fit. They are freaking out. It would be funny if it weren't so tragic, because these people have their fingers on the buttons of all kinds of weapons. And so that's my concern at this point.
It's very bad when leaders start believing their own war propaganda. It it is certainly the case in Ukraine, and it to an extent I think it is also, or at least was the case in Russia in part. I think that many of the problems of the early part of the war can be blamed on the fact that the Kremlin was drinking their own Kool-Aid regarding how everyone in Ukraine would greet them with flowers as liberators from the Zelensky Nazi regime, and all Ukrainian soldiers would immediately lay down their arms. And I think that this expectation was in part responsible for some of the fuck-ups.
Well, overall, I don't think that it was in the overall general strategy of it. Looking back on it from with 7 weeks vantage point, it doesn't strike me as necessarily bad strategy that they undertook initially, because it seemed possible that they could frighten the Zelensky regime into a quick settlement, and that seems to have been in the cards when they were meeting in Turkey. At the time, those meetings in Turkey during March, I thought that that was more window dressing than an actual attempt at negotiation. But retrospectively, what appears to be coming out is that they came awfully close to some sort of ceasefire agreement. And it was
Mm.
Boris Johnson's trip in late March that put the kibosh on that. Is that what you understand at this point?
It does look like that, yes. Many sources have been reporting on this, including Ukrainian ones, that they were basically. I mean, there were also, I don't remember who exactly it said, but someone in the Russian government said at that time in March, I believe, that, or alluded, they didn't state it outright, but what it was alluded that if they accept a peace now, then they will only lose Donbas, but
Yeah.
if they don't surrender, they will lose the south of the country as well.
Yeah, that was what was on the table back in March. So yeah, I mean, it seems like they made the wrong decision, and from what I'm hearing, especially from what Medvedev is saying, there is no possibility of Russia negotiating with the current regime, and I'm wondering who they plan to negotiate with. Are there any ideas about that?
Well, it has been stated several times, in like even by Putin himself in that speech
Yeah.
before the Donbas republics were formally recognized. Putin said several times in that speech alone that it makes no sense to negotiate with Ukraine because Ukraine is not a sovereign actor, and all negotiations would have to happen directly with the West.
Yeah, I mean that is not going to happen. I mean the West has thrown all of their lot into this. Jens Stoltenberg just last week, I believe, he said that if Russia wins, that would be a defeat for NATO.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was incredibly stupid for him to have said such a thing. But the fact that he said such a thing means that they are locked in. That they don't have a reverse gear. They can't back out. And so my great fear at this point is what sort of escalation NATO will attempt. I mean, I cannot believe I'm saying this, but a year ago I would never have dreamed of saying this, but I do believe that NATO, with all the propaganda that they've been spewing, they have convinced most of the people of the West that Ukraine is winning and it's all good, and so that they might use a nuclear weapon and blame it on the Russians, just as they blew up Nord Stream.
That is, I guess, a possibility that one should be wary of. I mean, I couldn't say how high I rate the chances of such a thing happening, but it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Would of course
Mm-hmm.
be that has always been like the great danger looming behind this, that it could escalate into like a war, a global war with catastrophic effects on everyone, basically.
Mm.
Um, but it is kind of it's kind of a game of chicken at this point. And the NATO is currently winning the chicken game
Mm-hmm.
because Russia is, I don't know if it's like prudent pragmatism or if they're afraid, but in any case, Russia is not escalating on the same level as the West is. Um, because the Russian military could do several things that would immediately improve the situation on the ground in Ukraine, like um, downing American scout planes over the Black Sea and over Poland.
Mm-hmm.
That would obviously be an act of aggression against NATO, a direct act of aggression against NATO, but would, in my opinion, be in line with the level of escalation that is happening from the other side. But they are not doing any of this, so yeah.
Yeah, Nikolai, what do you think? Hello? Oh, Nikolai left.
I think he's AFK.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be
Yeah,
back.
and the fear I have is that Russia's reluctance to escalate in response to NATO escalation will just basically justify to the Americans that what they're doing is correct, and that they will just escalate even more because there is no response. It's kind of
Well, yeah,
it's kind of a lose-lose situation, because if you escalate in response, there is
bingo.
a chance that is just cascades out of control.
Yeah.
And if you don't respond, you're also risking that the enemy is just gonna act with impunity, and this impunity will make him more and more reckless. So
Yeah, I thought back in April, May, I posted a Twitter thread. It's gone now, but because they nuked my Twitter. But I posted a thread basically saying that the smart thing for the Russians to do is to bore the Americans and the West in this war, to make it this slow grinding process with no spectacular defeat, because the West reflexively responds very aggressively to any spectacular defeat. Think Pearl Harbor, think the Gulf of Tonkin, think the explosion of the USS Maine. That wasn't even enemy action. It seems to have been an accident. The Americans in particular, when they are hit by a spectacular attack, they go guns blazing and they escalate, not just a step or two, but they go from 0 to 11 in just one go. And so I thought to myself that the Russians, if they're smart, they would play this no escalation game of just boring the West. And that's my concern at this time, because if Surovikin, yeah, he's going after these spectacular missile strikes and that spectacular video and fairly depressing video of all those people in Kiev with firearms shooting up at some drone, which I thought was ridiculous, but and dangerous. I mean, where do those bullets fall?
yeah,
But anyway, that was fairly spectacular. But if Surovikin, who seems to be a very aggressive general, continues doing such spectacular attacks, he might inadvertently hit a tripwire insofar as the Western propaganda machine, and give the West an excuse to go whole hog directly against the Russians. And so, I mean, I see what you're saying. You're playing chicken, and that the Russians are losing this game of chicken, even though they're actually winning the war. But I think it might be the smart thing to do, to just keep on losing the game of chicken, but winning the actual war, just as they're losing the Twitter war, but winning the actual war on the ground.
it's possible, sure. Like I said, I'm personally not sure which the correct strategy is here. They're both dangerous,
Yeah.
and but yeah, it's possible that just the restraint is actually the correct decision. I'm not going to say it's not. Regarding circling back to when we talked about Belarus in the beginning of
Yeah.
the stream, and regarding escalation, there has been some talk about a possible invasion from Belarus, not necessarily involving Belarusian troops, but Russians. And so what's interesting is that what would be the target of this attack? Some have speculated Kiev round 2, which I personally don't think is very likely, simply because you would need really a lot of soldiers to do
To
that.
occupy the city.
And even just encircling Kiev properly, you would have to cover around 100, 120 kilometers. And that's just a lot. I mean,
my thinking has been that perhaps from Belarus, they would attack west of Kiev to cut the supply lines from
yes,
further west.
yes,
That's
that's
been my
what I
thinking.
was thinking about as well. It would certainly be more logical than attacking Kiev, going to in the direction of Rutsk and Rovne, especially because Rovne also has a nuclear power plant, and that would basically completely shatter Ukraine's capability of generating electricity.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they would only have left, I think, the southern Ukrainian and Chernobyl.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, cutting off access points to Poland from where NATO supplies are driven in. That would make sense, although it is also very dangerous. The topography of Western Ukraine, it's hilly, it's mountainous, it's a completely hostile population. It's incomparable to Eastern Ukraine. You would have every single person who lives there would be hostile, and it would be extremely difficult, I believe.
Yeah, it would be very dangerous. Yeah,
I think
especially because
actually,
you'd have a salient sticking out of Belarus. with a lot of ground that you'd have to defend.
hmm
And so a salient like that, I mean, it would be a massive salient, but a salient nevertheless. I don't know if Ukraine, the Zelensky regime, has enough forces to do anything to really cut that salient and potentially leave those troops isolated.
I mean, I'm not sure Russia has enough troops in theater for such an operation. So,
Yeah. But what is
um,
true is that what's being gathered in Belarus is those 9,000 troops, 10,000 troops that they've been mentioning, they seem to be more command and control, and that initial grouping. And so that is very interesting. It seems like they're
I
setting
think
up the. Go
I think
ahead.
there are more than 9,000 troops there. I think those 9,000, they are, as far as I understand it, just the Russian and Belarusian government have announced that they would create some kind of uh, common troop to guard the border,
Hmm.
and the 9,000 Russian troops are basically the Russian part of this new regional defense troop. And but there are a lot of other Russian soldiers in Belarus as well. Some, I think, conscripts in training who are training on
Hmm.
the territory of Belarus. Some
Hmm.
are just regular troops who are stationed there for doing who knows what. And so it's interesting. I mean, of course, there's also the possibility that it's all just basically a feint and a way to force Ukraine to keep troops on the northern border
Sure. A fixing
where they
operation.
where they can't be used in like in the south.
Hmm.
And I think that is I'm not completely sure that that's what's happening, but I do believe it's the most likely scenario, that it's just a way to keep pressure up on Kiev.
My thinking at this point is, I think, well, you can do something, prepare for something, and use that for multiple contingencies at once. It could be,
Yes, of course.
a fixing operation all the way to an outright invasion and storming Kiev, or cutting Kiev from the west. It could be all of those.
Mm,
My thinking, my not concern, but the thing that I'm interested in is they seem to be amassing a fairly large group in Bulgorod, or around the area of Bulgorod,
hmm
right in front of me where I am here in Kharkov. And I'm wondering if, some strong offensive comes out of the south, that they might cross over from Belgorod and sweep around Kharkov and sort of like try to encircle and capture all of eastern Ukraine in one go, and aiming for Dnipropetrovsk. What do you think of that possibility? Because as I understand it, that troop is amassing in Belgorod. And by the way, Chad, I know I'm smoking like a fiend, but you would be too if you were here. So put me some
I'm
slack.
also small. You just can't see me. I'm also chain smoking basically right now.
Yeah.
um,
Oh, you got called up for conscription.
um, I do believe that. I mean, the strategy you've just described is basically what people were expecting or hoping for in Russia in the beginning of the war, the
Yeah.
so-called Pavlograd Ridge, where they would just encircle all of eastern Ukraine from all of Donbas and Kharkiv, basically, and that I'm not sure if even with the mobilization there are enough troops for that. It's very difficult to achieve such a feat. I believe if the Russian military were to open up a new front, it would most likely be Chernigiv and Sumy,
Yeah. Why?
where they've already been in the beginning of the war, because it would put a lot more pressure on Kiev.
Hmm.
Basically, another direction from which Ukraine must put troops to protect Kiev, and also threatening Kharkiv, Poltava, and
Hmm.
it's basically a direction in which Ukrainian forces are more or less like there is nothing threatening them there at this moment. And it also it borders both Russia and Belarus, so you could like come from two sides, and I do believe that would make the most sense if they were to open up a new front, which I don't necessarily think is going to happen. I think what's really interesting right now is that the Ukrainian military's behavior, because there are some things that I don't really understand that are happening or that are not happening, because you would expect that the Ukrainian military would try to regain as much territory as humanly possible before the mobilized troops arrive in the theater, which is part of what we saw in Liman, but they didn't manage to go further from Liman, basically.
Well, they were prevented. They were stopped.
Yeah, but and also in Kherson, but right now they are just yes. I mean, the question is basically what exactly happened. Did they suffer catastrophic casualties in the area and simply can't advance anymore, or did they pull out troops from there to reinforce another part of the front? Because they are supposed to have very large reserves, as we've mentioned, 700,000 active duty military right now. And from what I hear, the troops they are now using to reinforce Kiev and the north, those are not even regular troops. Like they are creating ad hoc mixed units made of border guard, national guard, and even cadets from the military schools in Kiev to protect the city. And I'm just wondering why they should have very large reserves. Either they are trying to reinforce the north without touching those reserves and basically negating this feint. And so basically, like if Russia wants Ukraine to put a lot of troops in the north, then they just don't, and they create new troops to put them in the north, and so they can avoid this. And the other option is that Ukrainian military capabilities are very degraded at this point.
I think that that's the latter. I think that it's not part of some strategy, some grand strategy, but rather they have been so degraded.
I certainly think that people mostly overestimate maybe not the manpower in Ukraine. I don't think they have manpower problems, but they have problems with infantry that is capable of offensive operations, and that have some degree of training, that have enough heavy weapons, that are mechanized, and mechanization seems to be a big issue right now, because what they did in Kharkov Oblast, they attacked the part that had basically the fewest Russian soldiers anywhere on the front lines. And this tactic they used of a small armored breakthrough and then just pouring in with like cowboys on Humvees. This works. This works to break through defenses only in places where there are no defenses. And 2 days ago, 3 days ago, they tried the same thing in Kherson Oblast, around Duchany, where the river is. And
they got hit hard.
They got hit very hard. The 128th Mountaineer Brigade supposedly took extreme heavy losses there. It's a very unlucky brigade, actually. It's the same one where they had an official day of mourning in their home region the last time they took very heavy losses. So it does seem like they have lost most of their offensive potential by now.
I think that that's the problem, and the offensive potential and potentially defensive potential. I think that they're out of gas insofar as actual combat troops. Douglas McGregor, that very astute American colonel who is commentating on this war, and of course he differs radically from the Western narrative. He is of the opinion that the army of Ukraine, the original army of 240,000 soldiers, that's all gone. He believes that that army is absolutely gone, and that it's all conscripts and foreign contractors, and there are a lot of foreign contractors. I mean, that's obvious. You know, all these foreign weapons, they're not running themselves, and they're certainly not being operated by Ukrainian soldiers, because it takes months to train on that equipment. And so it's very obvious that all of those guys are foreign contractors. And there's a lot of talk that a lot of the more successful offenses were stiffened by foreign mercenaries and foreign contractors. And
I mean, that's basically what we saw in Kharkov Oblast. There are a lot of videos of English-speaking people, like in Izium and Kupiansk, and it does seem like they played the cowboy on Humvee part, basically, in that offensive. And I can't really speak to the authenticity of these claims. I'm not sure if it's true, but supposedly they tried to do the same thing now in the north of Kherson Oblast. But since there are more Russian troops there and proper defensive lines, I'm hearing rumors of many mercenaries or foreign volunteers, or whatever you want to call them, refusing to participate in offensives there because it's too risky.
Now that I'm remembering, yes, that I've heard that. My sense, and this is inarticulate, but I think that the Zelensky regime is at the very end of its tether. The hysteria with which they are beating the drum of getting more gear from the West seems to be an indication of this, and the fact that the West doesn't have any more gear to give, and I think that we're coming to the end of the Zelensky regime's forces being a functional offensive grouping. And I think that, my sense actually is that we're about to see the coup de grace, because, the Russian side, with all this influx of new men, they're amassing a huge army. And
hello? Are you here, Gonzalo?
Yes, hello. What's happening?
Gonzalo is gone, I think. I think maybe his internet is gone.
Yeah, I was too busy DDoSing Gonzalo's internet connection so we could hijack his stream. So it worked, right?
Right. Well, we were just talking about that the Ukrainian military is basically out of gas with regards to offensives, and what we talked about in the last sitrep, basically.
Sure.
It's
so, guys, please subscribe to Russians with Attitude on YouTube, Patreon, and Gumroad. We are, the best source there is on everything to do with the Russian world. Should be. Here's Gonzalo. Yeah, I was too busy DDoSing your internet connection.
Stand back, SBU, stand back. I have to finish the broadcast. Okay? No. We'll go to the interrogation later. Oh, you have thumb screws. Oh, that's very nice. Later.
Right.
I'm sorry about that. It couldn't be helped, obviously. But please go ahead. What were you saying? And by the way, I'm blacking out, but I'll be back in just a second. I'm just moving around, but I can hear you. Please continue. What were you saying, Kirill, before we were so rudely interrupted?
You were saying that the Russian military is currently amassing very large forces, and some kind of offensive is expected, and I agree with that. My own prediction from 3 weeks ago was that by mid-October we'd see a stabilization, and the Russian military would stop retreating and create coherent defenses, and we'd see a large-scale offensive in December, I would guess. Right now, the weather is also on Russia's side, while troops are still moving or being trained or just being moved into the theater. The Rasputitsa has already begun. That period before winter, when it's raining a lot, when the roads all turn into muddy death traps, and it's very hard to advance.
Yeah.
for vehicles, and especially since most of the mechanized forces Ukraine currently has seem to be Western vehicles, they are even less suited for advancing through the basically endless field of mud that is Eastern Europe in the fall.
Yeah, that seems to be the case that's been going on. My thinking also is that what I was further going to point out is that the Zelensky regime seems to be amassing a whole boatload of troops in Bakhmut and Kherson and Zaporozhye, sort of like a last-ditch effort, one big roll of the dice. And it seems that they're going through that right now, and I think that it'll probably be catastrophic. I mean, what do you think of that? Because I understand, by the way, at Bakhmut, they have something like 30,000 troops there, combat troops.
I
And,
think I think that number is a vast overestimation.
oh yeah.
I believe that to be yes. I mean, these troops are first of all, these troops are not just at Bakhmut. It's basically the whole area. It's when people say 30,000, what's meant is the Bakhmut direction and not the city of Bakhmut, and that covers a good chunk of the front lines. That covers
Hmm.
the southern part of the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka arc, which
Hmm.
will be the main defensive line, the last defensive line in Donbass.
Yeah.
It covers Toretsk and New York, so
Hmm.
the areas directly north of Donetsk,
Right.
Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and Solidar.
Yeah.
So that is a pretty large area with a lot of, and it's one of those areas that has been fortified for the whole 8 years.
Yeah.
And they do have a lot of troops there, but I think Bakhmut is especially interesting because the troops that are advancing into the city, it's almost exclusively Wagner, PMC.
Hmm. Yeah.
And they are making steady gains there. It will be fierce, but they are already inside the city. And now it will depend on how much of a defense the Ukrainians mount in the city. And it could turn into another Mariupol,
Hmm.
but it could also turn into another Severodonetsk, meaning that the Ukrainians simply pull out when the situation becomes untenable.
Mm.
That is also a possibility, which would let them preserve troops, but the fall of Bakhmut would be an interesting scenario because it would not lead to a direct collapse of the Ukrainian lines
Hmm.
in that area, but it definitely opens up a lot of different directions for action. It's kind of like the fall of Popasna earlier,
That's what I was
which
going to mention. Yeah.
yeah, which opened up that whole area and allowed offensives into like 3 directions at once.
Yeah.
And Bakhmut would be much the same because Solidar would basically become impossible to defend Solidar if Bakhmut falls,
Hmm.
and it also makes Toretsk very vulnerable. Right now, it is less of it would be less of an important victory as it would have been if Izium was still in Russian hands,
Hmm.
because there is basically a highway that goes from Kharkiv to Izium to Bakhmut and to
Hmm.
Slavyansk. And this highway would have become a focal point in any offensive on Slavyansk. But an offensive on Slavyansk is now out of the question, of course, for the time being, after those losses in the northern Donbass.
Hmm. Because yeah, as I understand, Bakhmut would be like Popasnaya, like a flower that they could strike in
Hmm.
multiple directions.
Yes.
And precisely for that reason, I would think, the loss of Popasnaya really hurt the Zelensky regime, and I would think that it would be incumbent upon them to hold on to Bakhmut, excuse me, and to really just throw the kitchen sink at it, to hold on to it no matter what. And it could be that it becomes essentially a death trap for all those Ukrainian troops.
It's possible. It's definitely possible. Yeah. We'll
Mm.
see, I guess. It's hard to predict things really, and especially right now when the fog of war is more intense than usual.
Yeah. Yeah, Nikolai, you've been so quiet, except when I was away that all of a sudden you appeared. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on anything in particular?
Well, I can't really add much to the map porn of various Ukrainian villages, right? The Ugledar, Solidar, Bakhmut. It's I don't
Whenever I
really
look at
think
it,
that.
whenever I look at with those tactical maps, man, I just feel sexy. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Nikolai, you were
I
saying?
wonder, is the Western audience really that much entertained by the flower of Bakhmut?
Well, we've got 4,200 people in
Oh,
chat.
they are.
So chat, hit me with a +1 if you're entertained by this this map porn that we've
Yeah.
been indulging in. You know.
Well,
But
yeah,
Nikolai,
it's
while we wait for chat to catch up, what are your thoughts?
about what? About well, I agree. Well, there's not much that I could add to the map porn, unfortunately.
No, my porn is geopolitical porn, you know, and I'm looking at the
Right.
West completely freaking out because there have been a lot of signs that a lot of people who are very plugged in, they recognize that the situation in Ukraine is coming to I mean, Ukraine, the Zelensky regime has really already gone off a cliff, militarily speaking. And I think that the more sophisticated and more plugged in people in the Western leadership class, they recognize this. And so they are trying to salvage something out of it. And they're you know, the kind of propaganda that you're seeing coming out of reputable news sources, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and on the rest of it, it's off the charts. It's just all kinds of stupid, you know. Like there was one headline that I remember, you know, that said that the Russian missile strike was, you know, number one, they were throwing their last missiles because they were running out, and so it was an act of desperation. Number two, the missiles didn't kill anybody or killed relatively few people, and therefore they were ineffective. And number three, that they had destroyed the entire electrical grid. So which is it, you know? I mean,
There was also a news item that Russians are stealing washing machines and taking out the chips for the missiles.
Have they come to your house already, Nikolai?
No, not yet. I think they are stealing washing machines in Ukraine because Russia doesn't have any.
No, the kind of propaganda is just off the charts, and the worst part is that so many people believe this bullshit. I mean,
they even cut out the old Viagra story that they
yeah,
moved in Libya.
Yeah, but what the hell? I thought that the Russians were such savages because they live in the jungle. Don't you know it? According to Joseph Borrell, only the Europeans live in a garden. The rest of the world lives in a jungle. And yeah, the Russians are from such a jungle that they're just horrible, and they would rape everybody that moves. But you know, they need Viagra to be able to do so. I mean, what kind of idiocy? You know, I mean, that's the thing I'm focusing on, and just. I just hold my head because none of these people want to negotiate. None of them want to end this thing. They just want to double down. And that's the thing that has me deeply frightened and deeply unnerved. I've been talking to a lot of friends in Germany in particular. They have no idea what's coming for them this winter. Many of them are just very ignorant of what has happened to them insofar as their divorce, the forcible divorce from Russia, and the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. The Germans know who did it, and yet they're not saying anything. They're not telling their people who did it. And it's obvious that it was the United States, perhaps with Polish assistance or Swedish or Danish assistance, but it was principally the United States who did it.
I thought it was pretty funny, or like it's actually sad, but it's both. When the Swedish government said basically they know what happened, but they are not going to tell Germany.
So much for allies, you know. Isn't Sweden supposed to join NATO?
It's a hell of a thing to put on your NATO application.
Yes.
Yeah, so this war is a forced acceleration of the green energy because Germans would never willingly do it, right? Why bother if you have so much cheap gas from Russia? And now they kind of have to. So this is why this war, in bad case scenario, might drag out for years or even a decade because, well, it's beneficial to the powers that be. They might do stuff that they couldn't do earlier. That's
Oh, certainly, certainly. And I think that we're already seeing the amount of civil unrest going on in Europe, and none of the mainstream news outlets are mentioning it. And it seems very clear, it's becoming increasingly obvious that they are starting to repress people who are speaking out about this war. And so, you know, all the democratic values are just going right out the window. All this nonsense that Europe is this beautiful garden, you know, with all these rights and privileges and whatnot, it's just being burned to smithereens. That's what it looks like at this point, at any rate.
Yeah, it also empowers countries like Poland that didn't really play much of a role before the war. So
Yeah.
it's a restructuring of Europe, and the Atlantic countries are benefiting from it. So why stop this war? And it also drives the military-industrial complex in the US and stuff like that. US and England, Britain are not suffering much. So, yeah.
Well, kind of. In Britain, they're running out of energy. They're going in with rolling blackouts, and they're already
Really?
preparing for a very cold winter. Oh yeah, and in fact, the British economy nearly crashed last week because the Bank of England had to go out and basically backstop a lot of the gilts, the British, the equivalent of British Treasury bonds. And no, the British economy is in tatters, it's ruined, and it's collapsing. The government in power right now, Liz Truss, well, you know, her days are numbered, and she's only been there like 3-4 weeks now.
Yeah. But it's a monarchy, right? Who cares what the peasants feel like? So, yeah, they operate in another dimension, I think.
What I think we're seeing to a large degree is America consolidating control over its vassal states.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's basically two processes happening at the same time. Namely, one is that America is consolidating control over its European and other vassal states, and at the same time, you're seeing the a rise in importance of regional powers. Like Nikolai mentioned, Poland is getting a much more prominent role than it had
Or
before the war.
Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, yeah.
Well,
They're
those are an
relevant.
afternoon snack for Russia.
Not
So-
even just in Europe. I mean, Turkey is playing a very
Yes.
important role in this conflict. Iran is Iran I find very interesting actually, because basically it turned out that Iran is the only capable ally that Russia has, like the
Yeah.
only ally that is capable of doing anything to help.
Yeah.
And I find the point is basically that the Russian military had its priorities wrong in the last decades. They put all their skill points in strategic weapons that are capable of leveling whole continents in case
Yeah.
World War III breaks out. While the Iranians, they put all the skill points into the ability to break through Israeli air defenses and to attack the US fleet, which is much more relevant. And it is quite interesting that the Iranian drones are having such an impact, and it's basically a flying lawnmower with a bomb
Yeah.
attached. And
Yeah.
these things, but it makes a lot of sense because Iran can't afford a large modern air force, but at the same time, it is of absolute importance, of vital importance to the existence of their state, that they have the ability to, in case war breaks out with the US, that they have the ability to inflict catastrophic casualties as fast as possible to basically break morale and public opinion in the American homeland. And that's why they are so good at this whole drone game.
Yeah.
So the real war that we are seeing right now is between Israel and Iran, right? Israel puppeteers US, US puppeteers Ukraine, and Iran has a Russia is a crypto colony of Iran. I'm joking.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin calls the Ayatollah every other day to brief him on the situation on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, my thinking, you're absolutely right, Kirill, about Iran. It's so interesting because they were so sanctioned that they had to do with what they had, which was very limited. And so rather than try to do what the Americans do, which is, go high tech with the latest doodads and the latest little toys, they tried to go as simple as possible, as cheap as possible. And yeah, you were talking about the flying lawnmowers. Well, the fact is that they defeat a lot of air defenses because their heat signatures is so low, because it's an underpowered little lawnmower engine, basically. And yeah, it breaks through. And I think that you're absolutely right, that the Iranians are proving themselves to be the only capable people. And Turkey, with the carrot that the Russians gave Turkey of being basically the supplier of Russian gas to the European continent, by that stroke, all of a sudden Turkey doesn't have to play the both sides off the middle kind of game. They can be firmly on the side of Russia, squeezing the balls of the Europeans.
Yeah,
Nikolai?
right.
Yeah, I just remembered that Biden swore to protect Iranian people in March, right? Maybe he did not misspoke. But yeah, I have a picture in my mind of a jolly boomer Suravikin launching lawnmowers at 6 a.m. in the morning, and all the Zoomers are enraged by the noise. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what is also going to be interesting is that it's still just rumors at this point, but the Doritos were also rumors at that point. That the Iranians are gonna supply the new Iranian drone to Russia, the Arash 2 drone, and the Arash 2 drone is super interesting. We don't know much about it because it's so new, but the Arash 1 was already pretty good. It had, and the interesting thing is that it had basically inbuilt electronic warfare capabilities.
Oh, really?
It's basically a
A
drone.
flying jammer.
It's a kamikaze drone that suppresses air defenses at the
Jesus.
same time while it's attacking. So it was specifically built by the Iranian military to attack the territory of Israel. And of course, we all know that Israel has prime air defenses, probably the best in the world. And the thing was built specifically to break through those air defenses. And I think it's going to be one of those things that would very complement Russian military capabilities.
As I understand it, that Arash 2 has a range of, I forget if it's between 1,000 and 2,000 kilometers, but
Yes,
over 1,000.
the Shahid, or the Giran, as the Russian military calls it, also has a range of up to 2,000 kilometers. It's interesting because the Iranians, they have a lot of different modification of every piece of tech they have, and there are like a lot of different models for the Shahid, and some of those have cameras, some have not. And basically, as far as I understand it, there are two ways of launching the Shahed, the Dorito. One is controlled by an operator, but then the range is only like 80 kilometers. And then it has, it's the version with a camera, and it's, we have seen some proof that Russia has some of those too, because they were attacking like artillery and vehicles on the move. And for that, you need the remote controlled version. And the other one that is more often used is the one where you basically only put the coordinates in and it just flies there on its own. And it doesn't have a camera. And those are the ones that are mostly used for these strikes. And it's basically being used as kind of a cheap cruise missile replacement.
What
It's
I also understand is that, number one, these drones individually are very cheap to produce, and presumably there's a markup to it insofar as sales are concerned, but they're cheap. And also, what I understand that there was a recent dogfight between a drone and Su-29, I think, and the
A
drone won.
A MiG, yes, that was
Sorry,
a very interesting.
29.
So it was basically the Ukrainian Air Force raised a MiG
Yep.
29
Sorry, my mistake.
to attack these Shaheds,
Yep.
which already says a lot about Ukrainian air defenses, that they have to raise fighter jets to fight these drones.
Yeah.
And it says nothing good about Ukrainian air defenses.
No, it does
And
not.
yeah, my guess is what happened. The Shahed is pretty slow, and it's difficult to get a lock on such a target. It's very small, it's slow, it has borderline non-existent heat signature, and my guess is that the pilot simply miscalculated his approach, and he kind of crashed into the drone. And so yeah, this pilot became the first pilot in aviation history who got downed by an unmanned drone. And
Oh man.
they are now, and funnily enough, they are presenting him as a hero, as a war hero. They are
He
claiming
died.
that he shot down 5 drones and 2 cruise missiles, and
Ghost of Kiev.
they are putting him on TV. He's speaking on TV about how shitty those drones are and how easy they are to shoot down, and it's
Well, at
like,
least the poor bastard survived, right?
yeah.
You know, because I mean, I think we can all agree that nobody wants people to die, but though they inevitably do in a war. And so for this poor bastard, you know, okay, so he survived, good on him. But I think it points to the fact that manned aviation is essentially dead all of a sudden. I mean, you've got these planes that are worth tens of millions of dollars. In the case of the Americans, hundreds of millions of dollars. And some shitty ass little flying Dorito with a lawnmower engine that costs 20 grand blows it out of the sky. Okay, inadvertently perhaps, but it seems to indicate that the era of manned aviation, insofar as combat is concerned, might be effectively over.
I mean, I do think that we're not going to see many dogfights in the future. At least that point, like even like the new Russia has used the new Su-57 a few times in Ukraine, but it fired missiles from such a distance that it didn't even cross into Ukrainian airspace. So it basically fired the missiles from Russia.
Oh, by the way, sorry to interrupt. I just want to mention to you guys that we're just about to hit 4,500 concurrent viewers. So chat, I'm glad that you all are enjoying the show. To show appreciation for our guests, please hit me with an RWA for Russians with Attitude to show, you know, in the chat that you're appreciating this broadcast, because I am certainly enjoying it. And Nikolai, Kirill, I hope that you're enjoying the show too, and that chat has been nice to you, because I haven't been paying that much attention to it. But there we go. Lots of people are happy with you guys. So yeah. Nikolai, what are your thoughts, you know, to step back a little bit at the more macro picture? What are you thinking? Whoa, lots of RWAs. Oh man, I'm feeling jealous. I'm feeling very jealous here, you know? Yeah. Nikolai?
Yeah. About what? About the manned aviation?
No, in general. I mean, what are your thoughts at this point in the conversation?
Yeah. Well, I think, this conflict will be a long one, but I believe that other conflicts might happen also. Like, no one expects Japan taking back or attempting to take back Kuril Islands, right?
Right.
But I did not believe it. It was strange to me that the Japanese always talked about those barren islands, irrelevant islands, that they lost because they were allies of Hitler. It is quite strange, but they seem extremely determined. And every weakness or of such scale will be exploited by America sooner or later. So it's possible that Japan will conduct a special military operation for like 10 years or attempt to do so with the American help. Or Kazakhstan might also become, have their own version of Maidan and start, like deporting Russians. And I'm just, everything is possible as of right now. And it's kind of scares me that Russia will be forever immersed, forever surrounded by war, just like in the good old times, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems very obvious with the collapsing American empire that there are going to be a lot of smaller wars, and that the Americans themselves will get involved in them. And I think that the Pax Americana, if you want to call it that, yeah, that's over. And so a lot of people are going to start stretching their imperialistic muscles, if you will, like Poland, for instance. Insofar as the Japanese islands are concerned.
That's what I meant with my
Yeah.
when I remarked on regional powers earlier.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the Poles have their eye on that western slice of Ukraine, and they want it badly. They want Lvov, call it what you will. Yeah, Limburg. They want it back very badly, and I think that they are going to make a play for it. And I think that they might even make a stab at Belarus. I wonder whether NATO will get involved if Poland decides to make a move on Belarus. I mean, anything can happen. I mean, we really are, how can I put it? I've always had this mental model that life is like, you don't actually have free will all the time. That most of the time in your life, in the life of an individual or of great nations, you're kind of like trundling along a railroad. But periodically you get to a station where you have the possibility of all kinds of changes in direction. There are all kinds of tracks laid out before you. And you get to these periodic nodes in history where all of a sudden everything, all the old certainties are just blown apart and anything can happen. I think that February 24th was the beginning of such a node. And the issue becomes, what will be the next stage of stability? I think also that the Pax Americana over the last 70 years or so, or let's call it since the end of the Cold War to make it easy, this state of affairs over the last 30 years, this stability / stasis, well, it's been broken. And what will be the next stable outlay of all the participants, that remains to be seen. And I think that that's going to be an extremely interesting process, and I think an extremely violent one, unfortunately. And we are going to see all kinds of suffering in places that we never expected. I mean, come on, a year ago, did any of us think that the British economy would crash and that Germany was going to go without electricity or heating or even cellular telephony in the winter? None of us thought that, and yet here we are. It's an extraordinary period in history. I, for one, am just, I mean, I certainly don't condone or want any violence or misery or destruction or killing, but I have to admit, as somebody who studied history in university, I'm delighted by this because this is fascinating. We are seeing the history of the world change right before our eyes as we hit this node. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And it seems very hasty and accelerated, maybe because time is running out for the West or Russia or Ukraine in terms of population, right? Because with low birth rates and aging population, you can have many wars, right? Places like Estonia or Latvia, for that matter, their youth is going to Europe. In a couple generations, it's possible that there will be no men to fight, right? No soldiers, no young blood. So it's probably the last decade that we could see European war between European nations.
Yeah.
And places like Japan, will they have an army if the average age of a Japanese would be like 70 years old? So yeah, time is running out, and that's why it's so accelerated to get the piece of the pie in the old militaristic way.
And I think one of the reasons why it's all seems so hasty and accelerated is that people all over the world didn't expect these demographics to be such a problem simply for the military, because basically no one knew before February what a modern war looks like between peer nations. It was all theory.
Yeah.
But now we know what it looks like, and all the theories about like fifth generation warfare, robotic armies, drones replacing soldiers, and so on, it's all bullshit. It turns out that you still need a lot of infantry. You still need tank divisions. You need people to drive those tanks. You need people to man trenches. You need people to take over positions. And it's not possible to conduct a peer war without large amounts of infantry. And this is an astonishing fact, really, because we have been told for at least 2 decades by military analysts all over that this is not the case, that the wars of the future will be fought by like small detachments of special forces and a bunch of robots. But
Yeah.
that's simply not the case.
Yeah, just like Fukuyama's end of history was debunked by reality. And so the theories about some ultra high-tech military warfare of the future.
Yeah.
I found it actually very interesting that in some way there is like a contradictory process going on, namely that the presence of advanced air defense systems and permanent satellite and drone reconnaissance makes conflicts more primitive and not less so, because you can't do like the American thing where your war is like 90% airstrikes, and you also can't do like 20th century warfare with like sophisticated maneuvers and feint attacks and grand strategies and changing directions and so on, because the enemy can see what you're doing at every single moment. And it's basically removes the two aspects of warfare that are the most high tech, and it's turning into it's a bit like, you know, in Dune. In Dune, they don't
Yeah.
have guns because they have such sophisticated uh, personal protection systems, so they have to use swords.
Yeah. I mean, it's
And
paradoxical in the
it's
sense that,
kind of a similar process, because
yeah.
in modern warfare between peer opponents, it's basically, we saw that in the beginning of the war. Like Ukraine has a very sophisticated, very advanced psychological operations system in their military. It's really of high quality. They are doing extremely sophisticated work. And we saw on February 24th their main HQ get taken out by a 40-year-old Soviet cruise missile.
Yeah.
And also, then you have like these NATO, like it's always touted as the main difference between Soviet Russian and NATO infantry tactics, that in the Soviet or Russian military, you have like the top-heavy structure with a very strict hierarchy, while in NATO armies you have these network-centric small unit tactics, infiltration assaults with real-time intelligence. But then only they try to do that in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army has been trained to that standard for 8 years. They are pretty good at it. But on the other side, you have like some 40-year-old coal miner with a $200 Chinese drone and a piece of 50-year-old Soviet tube artillery. And that means that he has a 150 millimeter sniper rifle that can just destroy your network-centric small unit assault.
Yeah, it's paradoxical that the greater technology, the more it has primitivized warfare, and this is something that we would never have expected. I don't think that any of the most sophisticated modelings of combat anticipated something like this. I mean, it's just incredibly eye-opening, and what it is too is that the only weapon, there seems to me two weapons that have really been quote unquote game changers. They constantly say that, but the two weapons seem to be the hypersonic missiles and the drones. The exceptionally fast cruise missile that can really hit you hard, as they did in Yavoriv rather, in early March, and these stupid lawnmower drones that are wreaking havoc. And they must be panicking the people in Kiev, something awful. I mean, I saw some of the video that emerged from it, and the people were just completely freaking out. It was a little unnerving because the streets that were being shown were streets that I know very well, and I was in fact there when the war started, and the Russians had not done any of the things that they are doing now to Kiev, when they were just basically threatening Kiev, not even surrounding it properly. And everybody was kind of like freaking out in late February when I was there. And now they really are freaking out because the damage is real. It's like right there in front of them. I understand that between a third and half the country is without electricity. And the issue of running water has also become an effect. And so I think that we're going to see an even larger exodus of refugees. And it breaks my heart because I live in Ukraine. I love Ukraine. I think the Ukrainian people are lovely people, hardworking, decent people, all the people that I've met at any rate. And to see their country being emptied out, because it seems that those refugees, they're going to go to the West. They have been going to the West or to other places, and they're never going to come back. I do not see the Ukrainian nation recovering from this catastrophe. And what is more heartbreaking of all is that all of this was because of bad decisions, just stupid decisions, and the unwillingness to look at the reality and just, add up what the enemy has, add up what you have, and realize this is a no-win situation.
This is yet another hidden benefit, the cynical benefit for the West, the rejuvenation of the West with young Ukrainian blood, with white refugees. It's like was planned because Europeans were silently pissed off about the African and Muslim refugees, and now they get some white ones. But
yeah,
it's
but they're going to
of
be
course
cold and dark.
But of course, it's very tragic for Ukraine to become a deathmatch zone for foreseeable future. And yeah, who's gonna? Well, it's not even the question who's gonna rebuild it, because if the war will last for years, it's not even relevant anymore. Some cities in the east
why do you
are.
think it's going to be a forever war? I mean, various commentators have thought that it's going to be a forever war here in Ukraine. I'm curious as to why you think so, Nikolai.
Well, just looking at how this all is going, and I can't really imagine also Russia occupying the Western Ukraine, because it will be a forever guerrilla warfare, right? So, well, yeah, if Poland takes Western Ukraine, if they are allowed to do that, and then maybe it will end. But if not, it will be a forever war, just like Israel, Palestinians, Pakistanis, Indians, and etc.
Syria.
Yeah, Syria and war does not seem to end, right?
Syria?
Honestly, I disagree. I mean, it depends a bit on what's gonna happen, on what the Russian plans are for post-war Ukraine, but we're not seeing really serious guerrilla activity in the territories Russia has already taken, aside from a few targeted SBU assassinations that they are presenting as like the people's war, but it's very obvious that this is done by Ukrainian intelligence services. But we're not really seeing large-scale partisan warfare anywhere in the territories.
I was
that
talking
have
about the
been
West, yeah.
Yeah, Western Ukraine, sure. Although I'm not sure if they have it in them anymore. They
Yeah.
used to. They did fight the Soviets for like 10 years after World War II, but
And they were funded by CIA.
yes, they were from like 47. That's true,
Yeah.
and I'm really not sure if they have it in them anymore to do this, because it's a very different world. And also, if there's one thing that Russia has a lot of relevant experience in, it's counterinsurgency and counter-terror operations.
Yeah.
And I think the Caucasus is worse in that matter than Western Ukraine.
Well, yeah, they're more, Chechens were much more ideological and armed and, yeah, ready to die for a cause. But actually, recently, I think yesterday, Ukrainian rather recognized Ichkeria. Ichkeria is a terrorist version of Chechnya that was in the 90s, right? Proclaimed by the terrorists.
Yes, Ichkeria is basically the government in exile of Chechnya that is run by the separatists and terrorists from the 90s. And now Ukraine has officially recognized it, which is kind of hilarious if you look at their priorities. And like a third of the country doesn't have electricity, and they are just like recognizing irrelevant extremist groups who are only active in Brussels anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, the Zelensky regime recently broke off diplomatic relations with Iran, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that the Iranian government is about to fall over because of this scam. No, what I've been thinking from the very beginning of this conflict, and I said so on videos, so you can find it in my early videos, was that in my early videos, insofar as this conflict is concerned, is that it seems to me that the Russians would wind up taking all of East Ukraine, from the Dnieper, everything east of it, and of course everything south, including Odessa, all the way to Transnistria. That seems geographically logical, and that they would create this rump Ukraine state with a capital in Kiev that would be right up against the Russians across the river from them, and that they would allow the Poles to take over Western Ukraine, and in essence, kind of like dump all of the crazies, all the extremists of the Ukraine conflict, dump them into that far western portion of Ukraine that Poland would take over. And all of a sudden it would become Poland's problem. I stand by that, I don't know if you want to call it prediction, speculation as to the end of the war, but it seems the most logical one, that western piece of Ukraine around Lvov, perhaps up to Ternopil, I don't know how to pronounce it properly. Please excuse me if I'm
Ternopil, yeah.
Ternopil, thank you. Yeah, that whole chunk, the Poles want it badly for historical reasons, Galicia and all that shit. And so make it the dumping ground for all the crazy banderistas and right sector and all the rest of the nuttos. Leave them there, and all of a sudden, who are they going to start messing with? The Russians, who are 1,000 kilometers away, and you're going to have this rump puppet regime in Kiev, who is obviously going to be extremely friendly to the Russians and basically a subservient vassal state to the Russians? Or are they going to start messing with the Poles that they've got right there, and they're going to feel that, Slava Ukrainia and all that stuff, that they deserve to be independent of the Poles? And so that would seem to me like a stable situation insofar as the Russian point of view is concerned, and a very unstable and dangerous situation for the Poles. And it could become their Vietnam, their Afghanistan, their an endless quagmire for the Poles, not the Russians. What do you guys think? I mean, breaking up Ukraine the way that Syria has been broken up.
They're doing a similar type of stuff in Kherson, exiling people from Kherson. They
no, in Zaporozhye. No, they're doing that in Zaporozhye Oblast.
What are they doing specifically?
They have basically made it so that people who support like Ukrainian intelligence operations or act as artillery spotters or whatever else, or take photos of Russian troop movements and send it to the Ukrainian military, that those people are being punished by being deported to Ukrainian controlled territory.
See? Okay.
Well, the deportation is that they are standing at the border and they are ordered to go to Ukraine by foot? Couldn't they just, hide in the bushes and return? I don't know how it works, but
I don't know how it works either, but I'm sure that they have some method to keep them away permanently, but without actually shooting them. I'm assuming that they're not shooting these people, right? Because the laws of war, they would be in their, I mean, they would be POWs at best, or just shot on the spot at worst.
I don't think they would be entitled to POW rights if they're illegal combatants.
I don't know the legality of that.
I
And
mean,
don't
it's a
know
bit
the,
it's a bit of a gray zone. It's complicated because especially when you have stuff like artillery spotters in civilian clothes. Like in Iraq, the GIs didn't mess around. If they saw someone who looks like an artillery spotter, he gets shot. But the rules of engagement are stricter in Ukraine for the Russians, and it's becoming a problem in some places. It happened to a person I know personally, who fought in the war, and while they were being ferried across the Dnieper, they were hit with Ukrainian artillery, the boat, and they saw the spotters actually, and the spotters were teenagers on bikes.
Oh,
And it's a shitty situation basically because
yeah.
like you don't want to shoot kids. No one wants
No.
to shoot kids,
Of course not.
and they are specifically forbidden from shooting at artillery spotters in civilian clothes.
I think the people that they are going to start shooting quietly, but I think that they will, is anybody who has any kind of extremist tattoos or anything like that, any POW that the Russians capture, because I think that, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because you're there, I think that there was a lot of outrage over the fact that they swapped out some Azov battalion people for Russian POWs. Those Azov people that got sent to Turkey, they wound up going right back to Ukraine and right back into fighting. And so I think that I wonder, and quite frankly, if it was a cynical maneuver by the Russian officer corps to basically give the green light to their troops, that whenever they spawn anybody that they believe to be Azov or any of these extremist groups, to just shoot them on the spot and not bother capturing them. What do you think of that possibility?
I'm sure this is happening, but I don't think it was some large plan. I think the problem is that the Russian government kind of created this problem for itself because they so overly demonized Azov and put so much emphasis specifically on Azov. While if we're being honest, there is not a lot of difference between Azov and like the average Ukrainian military officer.
Yeah, you saw that little bracelet that Zaluzny had. Yeah, chat. If you're interested, look that up. Look up that picture. It's all over the place.
And it's basically part of the Russian propaganda to make this distinction between the evil nationalist battalions and the innocent AFU soldiers who were all mobilized against their will and don't actually want to fight for Zelensky. And I think this is being done on purpose to basically to avoid to creating the kind of ethnic hatred between Russians and Ukrainians, because like if you present the enemy as just like a small minority of extremists who force everyone else to fight, then that is like a chance, an off-ramp for Ukrainians basically.
Yeah,
That
I agree.
Ukrainians don't think that they are the enemy, but that well, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
of course, it is just subjectively like a lie, and like the people who are like Azov never had rocket artillery. Azov weren't the ones firing rocket artillery into Donetsk and Lugansk. These were all regular, normal, professional contract soldiers of the Ukrainian army, and
yeah,
so
I agree with that propaganda, to tell you the truth, because for the after war, you have to be thinking of the after war, and to create such ethnic hatred towards anyone who was a member of AFU would be, for the after war, a disaster, because it would lead to recriminations, to unwarranted shootings of people, And so I understand the rationale of the propaganda, of the Russian propaganda, and I agree with it because I understand the practical necessity of it.
Yes, I agree with you here. It certainly makes sense from that point of view of keeping the peace after the war. In that sense, yes. But it created a problem in the sense that Azov are now like the
Yeah, the
boogeyman,
demons. Yeah, the boogeyman.
and now you can't just exchange them, and like they declared Azov a terrorist organization. They spent a lot of time talking about them, and of course they are terrorists and they are very evil people, but it's really doesn't make sense to just take them out of the exchange pool, especially since Kiev insists on only exchanging Azov. And like the Russians have 8,000 or so Ukrainian POWs, and Kiev has not made any efforts at getting like the regular soldiers out. There has been an exchange yesterday. They got like 100 female AFU members out.
2 of them decided to stay. They must have found some nice Russian boy, So yeah, I guess that Viagra worked. Hey.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
but I don't think that this is going to be a forever war, to tell you the truth. I think that if you look at a lot, yeah, I mean, perhaps it's naive on my part, but my thinking at this time is that historically, a lot of times, a losing army is fighting and fighting and fighting until all of a sudden it just collapses, like the spirit leaves them. They no longer have it in them because perhaps a tipping point number of the soldiers and the officer corps realize that it's pointless to continue, and the army just collapses. I think that we might be reaching that moment that all of a sudden they just give up, and that has happened in countless wars. In the First World War, the Germans were fighting and fighting and fighting, and then all of a sudden it just collapsed. And so I'm thinking to myself, if we're lucky, and perhaps this is, I'm hoping for this as opposed to it being a realistic outcome, but I'm hoping that the Ukraine forces will suddenly just give up the ghost, just decide, okay, enough. I mean, did I say Ukraine or Russian? I meant the Ukraine side, the Zelensky regime. I hope they just give it up because it's pointless. It's a pointless slaughter. And that just absolutely breaks my heart because all of these men, they're the flower of this nation and they're gone, and if it's true that 100,000 young men have been killed, this is a catastrophe because it'll likely be another 100,000 who are going to be permanently incapacitated in such a way that they will not be able to contribute anything to a future Ukraine. And those 100,000 who are dead, of course, will certainly not be contributing. And that core, the men who are thrown away and whose lives are thrown away in a war, that core of men is what elevates a civilization with their energy and industry and productivity. I mean, the European powers were never the same after the First World War. Neither the victors nor the defeated. The French Empire, France was never what it used to be after the First World War, with the millions of men who were killed. And so that's my great concern at this point, that I just want it to end as quickly as possible, not for my own personal circumstances. I mean, certainly, sure, but I mean, in the sense that it just seems inhumane to be throwing away lives like this. And the Zelensky regime seems, almost cheerful at the notion of throwing away lives like this. And that's why I despise them so much.
Well, we need to be monitoring the Ukrainian attitude to Zelensky, because as of right now, I don't see much distrust to Arestovich, to Zelensky, to Zaluzhny. Ukrainians, despite of it all, believe them. When it starts, the trust starts crumbling, then there will be hope that it will end soon, but not right now. They will have to live through this winter, basically, and this winter might be quite terrifying for them.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. And with that, we've been going on for an hour and 3/4. It's been a delightful conversation. And I'd ask you to give some final thoughts to leave our viewers with. And by the way, chat, I hope you've been enjoying the show. Once again, hit me with an RWA if you've enjoyed my guests. That I, for one, have had a delightful conversation. It's been really interesting. And Nikolai, Kirill, I want to leave you with the opportunity to give a final thought about this particular conflict.
One thought I've been having lately is that regarding all the bloodshed that's happening, is that I believe that one of the causes why so many people are dying is precisely because the Russian government tried to avoid that. What I mean is that these infrastructure strikes, if they had occurred on February 24th and like for a month straight, I believe that that would have been enough to degrade Ukrainian capabilities so much that they simply wouldn't have been able to wage any kind of war. It would have killed a lot of people. It would have killed civilians. It would have killed a lot of civilians. That's never pretty. That's what the US did in Yugoslavia, what they did in Iraq. But I do believe that in the long run, because of the decision not to do this, because of the decision to avoid killing concentrations of Ukrainian troops, like they didn't even hit barracks on the first day with missiles, and and the rules of engagement were absurd in some cases. Like Russian soldiers were not allowed to open fire unless fired upon. In some parts of the country, all in the name of reducing collateral damage and banking on the goodwill of the Ukrainian people and creating goodwill. And I think that this attempt at humanism has doomed very many people to die, both Russians and Ukrainians. And I guess the lesson here is that, well,
go big or go home.
Here? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know that we're winding down the show, but I have to disagree with you. I understand your point of view completely, but I think that the problem was that the political moment was not there for them to have launched an all-out offensive like that. And I think that there were two factors. Number one, that the Russians did not have the firm support that they have earned over the past 8 months from the non-aligned nations in the global south, number one. And number two, I don't think that Russia domestically was up for that, because I don't think that they viewed the West as such an enemy. Subsequent European and American actions have made it clear in Russia domestically that, you know, the West hates them. And so now there's the political will to do such an all-out strike. But I understand, Kirill, your point completely. But
I mean,
I think it was the
right
political factor.
You're absolutely right. And I guess the main lesson here is that, of course, war is the continuation of politics by other means. We all know that. But I guess one of the lessons here is that you can't let politics influence purely military matters, like operational matters, because that always ends up in disaster.
I don't know. Nikolai, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree that Russians themselves were not ready at all. People actually were too charitable for the Ukrainian side. From 2014, Ukrainians, even before Crimea, when Ukrainians did not really have any gripe with Russia, they started writing Russophobic songs, doing all kinds of anti-Russian chants on Maidan, and saying that they hate Russians. And Russians, in response, kept repeating, "We are brothers, you are brother nation," to no avail. And even in February 22, Russians did not see Ukrainians as enemies at all. So if, say, partial mobilization would happen straight away, well, I don't know what would happen to Russian society,
Exactly.
right?
Mhm.
In many, in a regular layman's person eyes, it would be attacking your brothers and
Yeah.
killing them
Yeah.
brutally. But
Yeah.
now Russians finally saw that, well, we are not really that brotherly, because Ukrainians, after all the torture of POWs,
Yeah.
open hatred, and desire to burn entire Russia down, and even when, like, there are some Russian liberals who are against the war, are totally pro-Ukraine, and they get death threats for being Russian. This is not logical. This is irrational hatred that all of us are getting. And also, yeah, we didn't see the West as hell-bent on destroying us. But well, the regular person was not. I was always surprised by it. But yeah, right now there is a birth of the nation moment,
Yeah.
a political nation or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, because it seems that the intellectual classes in Russia, the westward facing populations in Russia, the more educated, the more socioeconomically successful, they always viewed the West as something to aspire to, and also I think that there was always, and correct me if I'm wrong. Oh shit! Sorry about the air raid sirens. Let me go and close a window here. Oh wait, let me just mute my camera. Sorry about that. Hang on just a moment. I think
immersive,
that
very
that
immersive.
the what you call it uh, sorry about that. I think that the Russian people always had. Forgive me, I don't mean to sound rude towards your people,
Sure.
but it seems as if the Russian people, the Russian intellectual classes, always had a sort of like an inferiority complex insofar
Yeah, yeah.
as the West is concerned, and they thought that the Europeans were some sort of golden people, and then they saw the raw hatred coming from the West, and I think that that was the big moment for them, that they realized, Putin had been saying for years that the West is not our friend, blah blah, but now they saw it. They saw the mask come off, and I think that that was a shocking moment that took a while to percolate through the classes, the intellectual, socioeconomically better off classes of Russia, and now they're fully on board. And so because of it, the political need to go in soft initially, to build up the political support internally, let alone insofar as China and India and Iran are concerned. I mean,
Go soft and then eat some Viagra. Yeah. This is the
yeah,
plan.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, anyway, we're coming up on 2 hours. It's been a delight. I'd love to continue. And please, guys, stick around a little bit after the show just to say a few words. I'd love to continue, but the fact that there's a famous saying, the secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go. So, chat, give us a final RWA in appreciation to our fine guests. And I hope, chat, that you've been enjoying these broadcasts. I'm going to continue them. Look in the description below. I have a dedicated channel to my solo videos that I'm going to be posting every other day that I'm not doing a roundtable. And please subscribe to Russians with Attitude. Their Twitter is down below, and you can find links to their podcast, which is a hell of a lot of fun. I was lucky enough to be a guest on their broadcast, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And they've got a lot of other really interesting guests. And so go check it out. And so with that, Nikolai, Kirill, stick around, but thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Gonzalo, and thanks to the audience cheering RWA in the chat.
Yeah. See, chat, you betray me. You never put GL for me, you bastards. Chat, thank you so much, and I'll catch you next time.